So welcome to the October 18th FoodOn curation group call. Straight to agenda. First of all, Amanda and Giorgio, anything you guys want to add or talk about?
No, but I'm hoping on Monday, next Monday, I will be working from home and I can actually start working on some of those product codes. It'll be
Okay.
my first work from home day in like 3 months.
Oh, all right. I just had a presentation to the USDA yesterday and mentioned the whole departmental interoperability thing. And so our food characteristics are really riding on that. And so I don't know if you're involved in the in that at all in applying those terms to food products in your work, but definitely they're pertinent. USDA, I think, is keen to know that whatever terms we come up with, they're sort of compatible cross-departmentally or agency-wise.
Yeah, it's definitely outside of what I do, but it does matter for like inspectors. And so for some of our other folks, and yeah, like that division doesn't seem to want to do much more than they're like, well, what we have done is fine and we want to stop there.
Yeah.
And so we have to like meet them where they are because they're overloaded. So, but yeah, so next Monday, that's my plan is to work on that
Okay, great.
since I can work from home.
Well, I'd like to spend a chunk of today working over it too. So live, but we'll get off to these other things on the agenda. Okay, so right. First of all, topic of renaming many underlying food product classes to say food material rather than food product. So I'll just share FoodOn. So we've got this food material branch, and then we have under it food product. And then we've got all these food product by this, by that, subcategorization. And the question is, what's the difference between food material and food product? Food product is the classification that demands that foods have been processed towards consumption, either by animals or humans. Whereas food material doesn't necessarily mean things have been processed much. And they may have actually, they may still be sitting out there in nature, and we still want to be able to talk about them. So our animal template has just focused on food material for all sorts of categories now. And that's even bumped up to organism material under our thing material entity. So if you go to organism material now, you'll get into animal material and then whole pieces and meat part. And here we're not even referring necessarily to food products yet. So this is actually like one step removed from Uberon, food anatomy. You get to reference all these things, but we haven't even committed to them being food products, and I like that. I like that you could still reference all these things. So then food product happens here, and the which is processed part means that it's gone into our food system. But the extent to which we can move things out of this food product hierarchy and up a level to food material, I think is useful. So we already have food material by component concentration. So you can say something is high fiber or high fructose, and it could be an apple still sitting on an apple tree. And I like that. I'm making a move. I'm suggesting that we take food product by quality and we rename it food material by characteristic. Characteristic is the new top level term for various kinds of quality of thing. There is the word quality still, and it is still a Pareto quality. And so Cobb, the sort of new Cobb full foundry ontology that brings together commonly used terms, has this whole branch of characteristic and quality, and then these realizable. So it still has these philosophical notions of disposition and role. Anyway, I don't think it hurts to move this semantically. I think it's the same thing, a little bit relaxed actually, because component. So I should be highlighting this one. Food material by characteristic. This characteristic is speaking of a more general characteristic. And I think that's okay to open up class a little bit, and then to talk about food material rather than food process, food product, I mean. So I would literally, and we can see this happening live, I would literally move this up to food material. Are there any objections to this? What I would do is say that I've done the move, and then I would send out a notice to the FoodOn Google discussion group saying I've done the move on the draft of FoodOn, and if there are any objections, let us know. So due process there. Now, the question is, what else can we move up there to food material and rename? So a number of these things do sound like they're closer to food products. So food material by characteristic certainly has a number of characteristics that are resulting from processing. And yet, so some of these things might be sort of inferred to be food material by process. So food heat treated could be dual homed to both food product by process and food material by characteristic. We may find that kind of thing, and maybe that will sound odd in some cases, but so food frozen is the output of a freezing process, and we already have some axiomatized foods that way. At the same time, you could interpret that as a food product by process too. So there's a subset of the food material by characteristics that are all about processes, and then others are just still qualities of things like semi-liquid and semi-solid. You're not committing to some kind of process getting a food in that state. Raw often, and that's to be the next and another topic of conversation. Raw isn't necessarily processed in any way. These names are saying food, and perhaps we're thus being ambiguous about whether this is food material or food product already.
So Damien, do you want to add like a food product by characteristic, something like that? Like a middle class?
Or not? How useful that is. If food material by characteristic covers all of that, and food material does have within its classes, it does have some that are the result of processes and others that aren't necessarily. One could write a query, give me all food material by characteristics that are output of process, some kinds of process, and you would get food material by process. So it's possible that this category could even just turn into processed food, which is this one over here. Or just shortened that label to processed food. And then you get a list of all these things that definitely have food industry processes applied to them, and that this could be inferred. So I'm actually predicting that this might wilt away. All of these processes here. Well, actually, I'm wrong. We don't have names occasionally for the qualities of these things. We could say food has characteristics, some color. So that is that this is one, food colored, would show up in food material by characteristic, like the characteristic of color. You could call cleaned a characteristic that it's different from some dirty state. Chilled is certainly a characteristic that's usually a result of processing, although sometimes out in nature you could find a chilled thing. Where's an example of something that isn't? Well, this is all by process, but does not have a characteristic term normally that we think of. So food organically grown, we call that an organic, or a food treatment characteristic, which is organic versus non-organic. We talk about, we might not say that there's a hulled characteristic. We would just talk about food part that's hulled. Here's a case where we might say this does not have any characteristics. So this term would be here under food product by process, but never under by characteristic. So I guess another way of putting it is, we'll have these nouns, food, puffed, preserved, pickled. We'll have the axioms of the processes that we know lead to that. But we may not have any, we might not have characteristic attached. We might have some characteristic in this particular case of acidic, because pickling can involve acidic, resulting in acidic foods, or fermented. So I don't have an action item on trying to do further work in that today, but I might in the future like try to upgrade one of these other ones to just being food material by consumer group, say. I think the food product or food material by process, food product by process is more likely to stand on its own still under food product. I guess this is what I'll do. Plan of action. I will send out the request for feedback on changing to food material by characteristic. And I will accompany that with, if people out there have any desire to see some of the other categories changed similarly. I'm not sure we'll get anything back, but on that. But. Okay. I'll just make a note of that. All right, next up on the agenda. Create a prefix for INFOODS in bioregistry. So are you folks familiar with INFOODS? INFOODS is this FAO, UN FAO sponsored tagging system for covering nutrients and analytic processes. And our friends at CDNO, Compositional Dietary Nutrition Ontology, have done the work of mapping the KEBI chemicals, such as this one, I can't even pronounce, epicatechin. Say again?
It's epicatechin.
Epicatechin.
Catechin.
Catechin, okay.
No, not the CH. It's like a K sound.
Oh, epicatechin. Thank you. I'll remember that next time I'm playing Scrabble. So they've done the work on doing the nutritional and the chemical INFOODS mapping, but they have not done the work on the analytic tags, and that's just going to have to be some future project by somebody. They don't have curators behind them to do this work right now as a project for the analytic side. At any rate, so all of the references that we need in FoodOn to go out to the world, to other vocabularies or keywords, they need a URL. They shouldn't just be a piece of free text string. And so we could create an INFOODS URL, much like there has been created for Langual and FoodX2 terms. So we would create one just like for Langual. So Langual doesn't, well, it has a URL that can resolve terms to the Langual website. I guess this resolve will take this Langual code and actually deliver us to the web page for Langual for that. The catch with the INFOODS tags is they don't have some location out there, as I recall. Do you happen to know, Sarah, whether they do or not?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Just wondering if you happen to know if the INFOODS tags have some URL that resolves to a page dedicated to each tag.
I haven't come across that. I think it's mostly like a PDF.
That it's mostly like which?
A PDF, like it's a PDF. It's like
PDF,
reported.
right? Yeah, right. So this bioregistry service allows for terms that don't have some kind of page per item, and the example of that is the siren exchange network thing. It's just a code for food products from long ago, and there is no way to resolve it, but they are allowing the reference. So what we want is INFOODS : and then the name of the code. And if we click on this, we just are taken to bioregistry, and it says it's unable to resolve it, which is totally fine. And that can be changed. So what I'm going to recommend is that INFOODS also gets an entry in bioregistry. And we will get in touch with INFOODS folks to get a few permissions that the bioregistry folks need. And here's the entry form for it there, where we fill it in on behalf of them. And with their input, we try to ensure there's a contact for INFOODS that can respond to requests. or questions about their coding system. So what that all boils down to is we will my computer's slowing down. Shoot. I lost the window. Okay. So anybody have any other comments about that? Questions? If any of you want to volunteer to learn how to do this, it is a task that comes up for other sources of vocabulary coding systems. And bioregistry is doing a great job of helping ontologies like FoodOn out. What it enables us to do is convert. Am I sharing the screen? Screen sharing.
It's still the FoodOn display.
Okay, let me just share my whole screen. So the bioregistry in FoodOn has, at the moment we have this INFOODS thing, and I think we would just make sure that this is lowercase and then mapped to a URL so that we're actually editing this whole thing in the IRI editor. That is the more appropriate way to cross-reference these things rather than some kind of string. So we're providing the extra URL. And these, just for information sake, if you're in Protégé and you're wondering when you encounter a prefix like, well, that's on this active ontology tab under ontology prefixes. This is where the knowledge is about the different prefixes. So here's Siren, we were just looking at, and we're providing the whole URL to that resource. And then similarly, Wikipedia here, so you can reference Wikipedia terms that way. So we will be adding INFOODS in a similar way once bioregistry accepts that. And that way, the URLs that you are referencing in the ontology get packaged along with the ontology wherever it goes. Okay, so I'm not thinking anybody might volunteer, but if you do want to, I'm happy to help you usher this along. Otherwise, I will take it on. Going once, going twice, thrice. All right, I'll put my name down.
Hey, Damien, not volunteering, but I did want to let you know that the PTFI has a meeting with Bridget Holmes at the second week of November, just to find out kind of what their plans are for releasing new tag names. It's said on their website for a long time, like coming soon, so I can keep you posted on that.
Okay, that would be great. Do you want to mention to them?
Yep.
That we're going to add, or let me put it this way: is this person a good contact for me to actually ask for
a point person?
Yeah,
I think so. So I think Bridget is like the new director of their food composition through INFOODS. I could be wrong, but I'm sure she would be able to identify a contact.
Okay.
Person.
So I'm happy to do a cold call about this and cold email. But do you want to send me her email address?
Yeah, I could do that.
Okay, good. Thanks. Okay, next up, milled food product review. So this is just me responding to some new USDA term requests for their foundation foods. And I realized our milled food branch needed work. So there's now a milled food product branch, and it has the general food mills category, and then it's starting to get and be the place to organize all sorts of milled things like flour. And a number of these weren't actually organized under milled food or even flour food products. So cassava flour, as I recall, I just organized it under Q. So now we're getting for many of these flours that they're under the cassava, the grain type or starch type, and then plant product, and then it's under flour food product 2, and flour food product is now under milled food product. But so are coarser things like this durum wheat, which you might not call a flour. So it made some effort to group these together, the durum and semolina type of milled products. And then, of course, oats and other things should end up in here too. So this isn't comprehensive yet. It needs some more work to get some of these other grains in. So there's a pattern here that needs to be set up as a little bit of a graphic under, I'm not sure where, maybe under the BIOS sample set of graphics. So I'm going to drop that in as a kind of a to-do. Which is to go and see which other flours and milled products need to be placed classed under milled food product. And anytime there's a to-do, an issue should probably be made out of it. So I'll add a FoodOn issue for this and leave it at that for now. Any questions about that? At the moment, just as an example, flour middlings was under flour food product, and yet the flour food product is just about flours, and then flour middlings doesn't count, so it had to be moved up a level in the class hierarchy. Okay, next up is what I'm now calling a biosample. So in conjunction with the spreadsheet, which is robot tables. Set that back on this tab here. Come on. Ah. I might give up on that. Okay. Anyway, in conjunction with this characteristic tab, where we're working on this mapping to the FDA terms and so on. This diagram should back up everything that's on this characteristics tab. So just thinking on the diagram side, there's some changes afoot. So under food material product by, it used to be food product by quality, now food material product, food material by characteristic. We've got foods that are chunked by their temperature status, and PATO controls the upper level temperature as a quality. Well, now we need to match both food by that characteristic or dimension over and ensure that there's qualities that match. So basically it's either working on the characteristic tab, we need to like echo all that work over here and vice versa. So one of the first questions that came up over on the characteristic tab, and I can't tell, Rhiannon, are you there? You are, okay, good.
Yep.
Let's talk about this, the beginnings, the raw, this use of the word raw.
Okay. Right, and I think part of that question that I asked was based on not knowing about the change to characteristic in the upper hierarchy. So I get now why you're not using quality.
Mm-hmm.
But there was other things that needed to be addressed in that comment.
Mm-hmm. Right. So raw is a characteristic, and at the moment we're saying food object quality, but now I think we should change this word to characteristic as part of the consistency.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I figured based on these previous discussions was going to happen.
Okay. So and I don't know if we even need to use the word object. Maybe we should say material.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be more consistent anyway?
Yeah. And I tend to personally like to go more broad than narrow when it comes to this sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, object is defined in BFO, material object, but I think we aren't necessarily talking about one single object. It might be an aggregate, or it's a characteristic word when we're talking about that. So I think that would be better to actually look at renaming that. Now, food material, if we're talking about a raw, so the other thing you're mentioning was you're mentioning sort of raw pertaining to other materials besides organisms, raw materials.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think it makes sense to cover that. And so I'm wondering whether we should have an unprocessed or raw material parent, that this could be a subclass of.
Yeah, okay, and then just make this a more specific to the organism application and then have a general one.
Right.
Yeah. think that covers the bases then.
So, so now, but things get a little tricky here. So, first of all, what are the examples of a raw material besides an organism? So I think it was like, is salt like a raw material?
Yeah, like minerals and stuff.
And we could say they've been obtained or collected somehow, and we call that raw material. So is there a difference between raw material and unprocessed material?
I guess when we say process, though, we talk about both planned and unplanned, right?
Right.
Processing. So I'd say you could still have something that is not raw that has like, could you have something, yeah, that's not raw that's being unprocessed?
It's always confused me.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, let's see if a material which has not had planned processes applied to it that affect its biochemical composition.
Yeah, because I think having it separated by unplanned makes sense, because I think there are some cases where something, or planned, because like there is something where there might have been like natural processes that have occurred that were unplanned processes, but we still consider it raw based on the processing we intend to do, or how we intend to consume it, right?
Okay, so what I noticed about organisms is that the one thing that the only kind of planned processes that we wanted to ignore there in order to keep on calling something raw would be aging or storage, where we're allowing those as processes, planned or otherwise, we're allowing those to occur, even though they affect the biochemical composition. You're allowing something to be called raw, even if it's aging and becoming rotten.
Okay, so even if it became stale or rotten, it still is within the threshold of being raw?
Right. We would still call it raw. There's no, raw includes, and so this is all up for debate. Raw includes decayed, possibly dried, and fresh as subclasses. And it would also include all sorts of things like fruit ripeness. Whenever you're describing these terms, these fruit ripeness, it's really kind of a subclass of raw. It's just pertaining to a particular anatomical part, taxonomic anatomical part. Does that make sense? Should I be more firm here and say that these are actually subclasses of raw? Oh, but I thought of these can be used in combination with other things. So actually, I'm wrong. I forgot about the counterexample. A frozen banana can have all of these things attached to it. Would we still call it raw? I guess we would. Actually, no. So tangential point, raw, fresh, dried, decayed. Fresh is the sort of one guarantor that this is at like room temperature or chilled. There's a temperature range associated with this. Oops. Oops. So just um, these are sort of allowed with the term fresh, the temperature constraints. So all of these things, though, you can actually have a frozen banana that's overripe or slightly ripe or unripe. Therefore, we can't have this be a subclass of raw directly, because it's only pertaining to. No, actually, all of these can be crossed with these. So maybe you can. I'll leave it to any of you to add comments here about whether you think fruit ripeness could be a subclass of raw or not. Or if it's actually different, if it doesn't directly connect underneath raw. I think we need cases where we're talking about something that isn't raw, and we would still be using these terms on it. I can't think of any at the moment. I'm going to add this piece of text. I think there probably are, but I can't think of any at the moment. Okay, so back to back to the tab. I don't know where it is. There. Okay. Oh, sorry, back to the diagram. No, back to the table. So we exclude plant processes, but we allow aging or storage. And we talk here about the biochemical composition. So can this be situated under a class which has not had plant process applied to it that affect its biochemical composition? The thing is, we would also have to add that exclusion of aging or storage up here. So raw material could be stored or aged per se. And we say, how do we do that? Is there a way to engineer it that this exclusion of aging and storage, if there's another word for that, maybe just storage, because aging happens in storage, applied to it other than storage? That affect its biochemical composition. And is this correct to say still for things like minerals and salt? So we could have a raw mineral, nothing's been done to it except maybe some kind of processing, but that hasn't changed the mineral. And it's sitting on the shelf for a year, and we would still call it a raw material. When would we not call salt a raw material? When it's been diluted or added to water, or
I know you also get people who make like smoked salts or lemon salts or things like that. Would that be considered a processed salt when people are
Mhm,
adding things to it, or again, just
mhm.
yeah,
And
making fancy salts?
so we would then say that's no longer a raw material.
I wouldn't think so.
Okay, that sounds right to me. Any chefs in the crowd who disagree about some particular thing that stays raw and is not an organism, a raw material?
I guess I want to argue that it has had a planned process applied to it, evaporation.
So I'm not able to hear you too well.
Oh, that was happening earlier. I was wondering if like salt has had a planned process.
Salt itself is a planned process.
It
Well, yeah,
had a planned process applied to it, so it was evaporated.
I
Mhm.
think it depends on how the salt is procured. I think that's definitely a means in which salt is procured, but you could also have it again. And is that something where humans intentionally plan to do that, or is it something that happened organically and people are collecting it afterwards, so it's unplanned?
Yeah, both.
Or if you have situations where it's like a large deposit and you don't know whether it was, say, evaporated from salt water, or if it just was gathered from like an area with a high salt concentration in like in a deposit or something.
Mhm. That's interesting. So there are various processes that could be applied to gather the raw material, and we would exclude those as well. Um,
And maybe because of the complexity, is it better to try to leave just processing out of it, or do we need it in order to understand the processes when we apply process materials?
it may be that we can't come up with a good definition for this, but we have an intuitive sense of raw material that we could place raw organism underneath, and that we just know we can't axiomatize raw material very well. So it would just be good to have some examples and counterexamples.
Any dried herbs or like dried coffee is another scenario where it could be planned or unplanned processing that leads to a raw product. So depending on if you're like on the producer end or the consumer end of coffee, you might think of green coffee as the raw material. But if you're laboriously processing either through mechanical drying or like natural air drying or just a product of drying, then it has had a process done to it.
Right. And we're definitely going to be having terms to catch those cases. And that's where this, that's the other thing I wanted to talk about this morning, which is this dried raw class. I don't know how to say this. I don't know what a better label is, but Pato itself needs terms for a dry material. Doesn't have that yet as a quality. Material dryness is maybe better. We don't want Pato be talking about materials which are dry. We want to talk about dryness of a dried quality, or a dry quality pertaining to the material itself rather than the surface, which it has right now. But that's a side note. Anyway, dried raw is there to catch what you're talking about, Sarah, in terms of a bean that was raw and is now dried in its raw state. So the accent here is that the quality descriptor is more on the dried side rather than that it's what we'd call raw any longer. But is there a better term for this? A better way to express that?
No, I feel like it's adequate because it is a raw, like a raw ingredient or raw material that has been dried. So yeah.
Right. So the descriptor guarantees that it's in a dried state. That's the important thing. So dried while in a raw state. So it's and there's a little bit of issue around past tense, present tense. We're just trying to convey that if something has this, then it is dry. Okay, we'll run with this for now. And I wanted this to be a Pato term, actually, rather than a FoodOn term, because it is generic to many things. But that was sort of a test question about raw materials. You can have dried raw material. That's more general than food itself. But for sure, FoodOn will have a food dried raw class and a food fresh. Oh yeah, that's not a subject class of it. Although this is implying that it is, but that was a mistake. By the way, what I'm going to do is tease apart these diagrams. So this food material by characteristic will be, won't have any side connections to here. We'll just have, we'll be sure to have the characteristics represented over here in their separate branch. And then so that we have a separation here. But we just have to make sure that all of these characteristics are off in either the raw or the temperature hierarchy. So in other words, each of these could start to be its own page or tab. I'll just move this a little bit further apart to accentuate that. So what I mean here is that this gets to go over here. Don't get this mistaken situation. It's a little bit easier to logic through. Okay, so under discussion from the table is that we have a class up here. Might be a Pato term. No. And that it's apparent. Let's see, we're almost at the end of the hour. And we're struggling with the definition. So in the spreadsheet, so dried coffee case is handled over here. So I can actually even pop that as an example.
I think just to clarify, like dried green coffee might help.
Dried green, right. And I've had this before. I've actually made coffee, roasted coffee in the oven, which is a recipe for setting off fire alarms.
It
Anyway.
works with one of those like German nut spinny things on the stovetop.
On the stove?
On the stovetop, like the spinny like German nut making
Oh, okay.
roaster.
Huh.
But also some people are consuming dried green coffee like as a health kick now.
Huh. I caught part of that, but
Sorry, yeah, I don't know what's going on with my mic. I was saying that people are also consuming the dried green coffee, or maybe even brewing it or encapsulating it as like a health kick.
oh, okay. Didn't know that. Okay. All right. So progress on this 11 o'clock. You're all free to add stuff here. I guess my main question is how we need a better definition for this. We have to exclude some processes, but allow some other planned or unplanned processes, or we just leave this really generically a material which has not had processes applied to it. Do we say that affect?
FoodX2 also has unprocessed as a quality if you want to check that definition for that. I think Magli added that in the robot file on at row 36.
Okay, can you draw my attention to that?
Yeah, it's a FoodOn report table, the same one, the food characteristics, and it's at row 36.
Row 36?
Yeah. In the FoodX2 side.
Okay, unprocessed. The domain specific characteristics are expected to be unchanged. Okay. So in other words, we can clean something, we apply process to it, but it's domain specific characteristics, whether it's salt or some organic part, they remain unchanged. So whereas we're saying biochemical, they are saying they're just being generic. They're saying there's some characteristics. And so aging would be allowed because it's a variable in that domain, which with a whole bunch of ranges, but they haven't specified that. So unprocessed. And they talk about raw food. Okay. I'll see about how to incorporate that because that does sound pretty good. Like, see how that meshes with our worldview. Okay, I can spend some more time today working on this. It's so critical right now. So, okay, thanks, folks. I'll stop the recording and yeah, chip in. Look forward to your input, Amanda, on Monday, for example.
Yeah, hopefully it might take me a minute to get up to speed, but I will work on it.
Okay.